Hi there. I would like to talk about the particular cases of individuals being released by certain countries. In case anyone has forgotten this story, Meng Wanzhou um, was the CEO of Huawei and was accused of a few things. Uh, Mostly fraud and different variations of fraud and violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. Now, that really is scratching the surface as to what she could possibly have been guilty of. And her stay here in Canada would not have necessarily been to her liking, but she was not mistreated for someone accused of doing such horrendous things, and they are indeed horrendous. However, this is scratching the surface, and what that company really got up to. There are sources on the internet that talk about this. China Uncensored would be a good start, in my opinion. Um, she was able to ascertain her relative freedom by heading back to China, free from the United States, I should say, not from the Chinese authorities, um, via the U.S. agreeing to a deal in which Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor were freed from Chinese custody. Um, the thing about this is, who are these two people? Why are they so important? Um, I'd honestly say if you're going to directly go to Asia for business practice, for bettering relations between the two countries, or so on and so forth, leisure, whatever, you deserve to go there. And you deserve to go into a cell and a prison somewhere horrible. And the things that happened to those two men, I really don't give a damn about, because this all has to do with the bigger picture, which is COVID, the fact that Joe Biden and his apologist to the Chinese regime's policies, the fact that Justin Trudeau is a bit of a crawler. This was seen as a feel good story, but nobody cares because there are many others who do not have the public image that these two men have, that are still in captivity and for various reasons, usually not because they're guilty of the crimes necessarily that they're accused of in Asia, but because they're political tools. And there are individuals within the government who would have never had made this deal had things gone differently. This is definitely appeasing the Chinese communist regime. Um, those two men, the Michael Spavor and Michael Korvig, they both look like over wealthy stock investors. That's the only reason they're making front page. Whereas Meng Wanzhou was a CEO of a major company that was doing espionage and causing a lot of trouble. Um, this virus, COVID 19, that has come about, um, it was an attack against the Western Empire. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that the Western powers are cowering in fear of this disease, like the way they are, um, shows that they're opportunist and cowardly at the same time. They were stricken with this the situation where money became a serious issue for the Western powers because they weren't dealing with China and getting, well, what is essentially free money, but not free money, but, kind of, but blurred. It's not the same thing. It's not the same concept as it is over here. And, they exploited COVID 19 for their own gains. Justin Trudeau was able to use that to maintain power. Joe Biden was able to use that to ascertain power in the United States. Whereas he is actually a very weak president, and not just physically, and all around. He didn't get his way with Afghanistan. There's no way he would have wanted to pull out American troops. He may say so. However, that's, you take his word for what it is. He's a compulsive liar. They all are. They're politicians. However, I do truly believe that Afghanistan, that the army wanted out, and Donald Trump's the one who pulled the plug on that operation. They don't really need to be there, and there's some thundering going on about the Taliban and their resurgence and blah blah blah, but a lot of people don't take into consideration that the Taliban aren't the same as they used to be. I'm not saying they're good guys. I'm saying the former leaders of the Taliban are, they are, they were all blown away for the most part. The Americans put in a systematic campaign of brainwashing, and usually it takes a few generations for certain brainwashing to take effect, but in a backwater country like Afghanistan, it was made a little bit quicker by technology. And this all is part of the bigger story, which is the Chinese Communist Party has basically kicked the Western empires in the shin and ran off and got away with it because their wealthy elite have not been seriously affected. Now, a lot of people in Asia have been put out of work where they were making basically nothing anyway, working in factories, but that does not affect their economic elite. They may and probably do and definitely do bicker amongst themselves, and that sometimes escalates even further than that because it's a corrupt little bureaucracy that happens to be losing the global war of popularity. And when people can't get popular by normal means, they use fear, and this virus was understood to be that and capitalized by the Western interests. They had a field day with it. What are they going to talk about when COVID's over? I don't know. This is all one universal subject, a World War III, and it will be with China and all the Asian countries within their sway of interest, whether they are compliant or merely used as satellites for the Chinese Communist Party. There are some countries which can stand on their own 2 feet, relatively speaking, with because they got American backing, like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. But there are other ones like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, the dreaded Vietnamese. Yes and no with the North Koreans. They didn't just build their army out to fight the United States or South Korea. They didn't want anyone getting in there, so that includes the Chinese. So don't think that North Korea is exactly what the Western media portrays them as. Not saying they're good guys. I'm just saying that, they had other things on their plate to think about. And people go on with their day-to-day, like they don't know, they don't want to know, they're over obsessing with the smaller picture. which is, I hate to say it, it's COVID. COVID is the smaller picture. I mean, it's a significant disease, that illness, virus that people can get, and it's a very unpleasant situation, and nobody really wants that. But it is the smaller battlefield. Um, it's really a comparison to tanks versus missile artillery. Um, Comparatively speaking, towards the bigger picture, the story they're not telling you, the over obsessing of, relatively insignificant subjects. I mean, it's important to be warned about, um, about potential viruses and whatnot, of course, but you know, they have decided that our society is not equipped to mentally understand the bigger picture, so they disguise it. It's not because they're being terribly clever, it's because they're coveting their own bets, and they are covering their asses, in a sense. They don't want anyone knowing too much or doing anything. And they will continue to do this, and in fact, will only get worse as time goes by. And the more people over focus on minor details, such as wearing face masks, as I've said, not really a big deal. I'd rather wear a face mask than, not wear one and have it need it. In fact, before COVID-19 was a thing, I was actually, for my own personal amusement, I was in search of a Israeli gas mask. However, that's military surplus, and they were attainable. You could probably still get one, but pay too much for it. But anyway, the filters that are able to, they filter out the bad stuff. If you were in such a situation, even, like a fire or something like that, it doesn't hurt to have a gas mask if you live in a home big enough to, have extra things like that. They actually have expiry dates. So the expiry date for those particular gas masks, which is, as I said, surplus, which is American or Western power military equipment that's for sale to the general public, should they be interested in. And I think gas masks are interesting anyway. I have many that are not usable because they have asbestos in it, but they're interesting to have nonetheless. However, with the Israeli one, the current generation of filters were nearing, relatively speaking, expiration date, and they were asking for quite a lot, and they only got more expensive because of COVID. That might be partial the reason why I'm not personally offended by wearing a mask. I would rather not. It's not entirely comfortable all the time. It's like I've got a made to specification, but without the asbestos, and it's not a gas mask at all. But basically, everything about it looks like a World War One Gumi mask, and that's for fun. And I'll put it on every now and then, but I don't really want to wear it all the time. But yeah, that's getting back to people making simple things more complicated. I mean, sure, that can make things more interesting, but when it's oversimplified and told over and over again without adding new information or at least pitching an interesting story, it really grows old very fast. And not only that, but particular Canadian media, they have this thing about stroking themselves. And I use that term quite accurately, actually. If you watch the news, our local guys in Vancouver are bad at it too, but I'm sure they are just as bad on every other channel. In fact, they are. pertaining Canadian news is they can't stop complimenting themselves even when they haven't really done much good. And, it gets annoying after a while, but it is a different version of things. So I do, encourage people to get cable TV. So you hear a different opinion because there is one set of opinions, really, the dominant one on both networks, the television and the different one on the internet. And all these things are they're they're very important because it's painting the bigger picture as to what's actually going on in the world. I mean, a lot of people don't realize it. They think, oh, you live in the big city, you live in Toronto or something like that. And it's like, no, none of our cities are actually that big or populous. And we happen to be, by default, somewhat, some individuals happen to be more interesting than entire countries. Donald Trump was such example. In Asia, everybody knows the name Donald Trump, even if they're scrummaging through computer rubbish in endless fields of, computer tech garbage, just to eke out a living. Even they have heard of the name Donald Trump. So, say what you want about the guy. He was able to accomplish a lot, and this release of Meng Wanzhou, I believe, is a mistake. It is cowering to Chinese interests and the Chinese Communist Party, despite its faults, has even more faults than you know about. And you can't appease with a country that is hell-bent on destroying the West. And if they're willing to do this as a sample of what they can do, imagine that our leaders give them the keys to go about doing this. I mean, let's not forget that the Western empires their leaders are kind of cold and, serpent-like themselves. They do not care about anyone else but themselves. I mean, to be in positions where they do the things they do, they cannot care about others. Otherwise, they cannot do their function, which is the protection of evil. Because we're a long way from it. Any politician would tell you that they would fear another world war and would do anything to prevent it. But important thing is, politicians lie. And some of them already know and are already scheming away and already calculating their risks involved for Western powers. And COVID-19 just showed the world what the Western Empire was willing to sacrifice in order to either avoid a war or be in one and understand acceptable casualties, quote unquote. Because this is a rabbit hole, and there are wolves on the other side of it, and wolf's gonna do what a wolf's gonna do. So, make your own judgments. Try to keep an open mind. Obey the rules to an extent, because some of them are actually logical, even though they're done for illogical reasons, or the reasons they were necessary are illogical. However, understanding the bigger picture, as I keep saying, is very important. And this little minor news story of the Michaels and Meng Wanzhou being released to their back to their countries. Um, it it's a cog in the machine. To be honest with you, I think Meng Wanzhou. I don't think anyone in the general public actually knows what she looks like. She was worth enough money that they could have put on an impersonator. Uh, to be honest with you, I think she was brought back there and then subsequently put to a firing squad because that's kind of how a military dictatorship like the Chinese Communist Party operates. Um, and, to be honest, that could be the same fate of Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor, is that they face the firing squad when they get back here. Perhaps they leak secrets. Perhaps they were coerced, broken, put in a vulnerable position, and acted inappropriately. We don't know. The news sure ain't gonna tell you. We got the garbage bits, don't you remember? And there's all these things: undetectable nuclear submarines, COVID, various viruses, economic damage to Western empires, um, the ever growing hunger of Western empires and big tech. A lot of people accuse the West of not being able to build good cars, of lagging behind in technology. And that's kind of because rare earth minerals that the Asians supposedly all have are not actually a real thing. I mean, there are minerals that are rare, but the ones to build computers with, to refine them creates a toxic waste. And we don't really want that over here. Whereas the losing empire is willing to do whatever it takes so that they become dominant. And that means toxic lakes? Sure, why not? So it's the refining of this garbage. And because they're willing to do that, because they're willing to make their workers slaves, and even their intellectual slaves, they're able to build things faster. As I keep saying, you put enough chimpanzees in a room with enough typewriters, eventually they're going to create Shakespeare. And you look at their entire bureaucratic apparatus, the equivalent of the CIA, for example. They have one. And it is multiple times larger in size by people personnel than the American counterpart, which is also an aspect. And these people know to keep secrets. Because if they don't, the penalty is far greater than it was ever conceived to be worth. And they know that. So, to be honest with you, I would have supported Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor not being freed from China, at least without the Chinese actually getting anything in return. We should have been able to demand them back, and they get nothing for it based on the plague that they've caused all of humanity. And this buckling is really unacceptable by the Western powers. And I'm specifically going to blame the Canadians because I happen to live in Canada and I know how dirtbag and trashy Canadians really are. So, anyway, take from that what you will. I encourage you to think and to have your own opinions. So, anyway, you have yourself a good night and. Yeah, send Michael Korvig and Michael Spavor back to China and make Meng Wanzhou stay here and face the crime she is accused of over here. Anyway, good night.